talk to you about Nature, the journals, the review process, and some other things that our journals are doing. So this is the editorial structure for the Nature journals. I am the vice president editorial for all the Nature journals. And that basically means that I oversee editorial strategy and management of Nature, the research, all of the Nature research journals. We have 19 life science research journals and 15 earth and physical science journals. Nature Communications, which is our flagship open access journal with over 100 editors, and the Nature Reviews journals, where we have 9 life science journals, 9 clinical journals, and 4 physical science journals. And as Dr. Kakamed alluded to earlier, I've been at Nature in different forms since 1999. So let me give you a short history of how the Nature journals came about. Nature itself was launched in 1869. It's 152 years old. Sir Norman Lockyer, who is an astronomer, was the editor at the time. And we didn't review on Nature until 1967, you may be surprised to learn, and I will talk a little bit more about that later on. We launched our first research journal, Nature Biotechnology, in 1983, and the second one, Nature Genetics, was launched in 1992, and after that we launched numerous research journals. In the year 2000, we launched our first reviews journals. In 2010, we launched Nature Communications, which is the flagship open access journal. Scientific Reports is not a Nature journal, but it is part of the Nature portfolio, and that's our Sound Science journal. And in 2017, we rebranded all the journals as the Nature Research portfolio. So today I'm going to talk about Nature in particular, but everything that I say about Nature will apply to the Nature Research journals and Nature Communications as well. So Nature is very selective, it is high impact, and it is very widely read. We don't have any external editorial boards or affiliations, but we have full-time professional editors who have PhDs as well as postdoctoral experience that work and run all the research journals, including Nature. So what makes a Nature paper? For anything to be successful at Nature, it needs to be very novel. It has to be technically convincing. It should be important to the field and of interest to a broad readership. So I said we are high impact, and we have over the years had the privilege of communicating some of the most exciting research in the world. In 1925, we published Dart's discovery of Australopithecus. In 1932, we published Chadwick's existence of the neutron. In 1953, we published Watson and Crick's DNA helix. In 1997, we communicated Dolly, who had been cloned from adult cells. And in 2001, we had the privilege of communicating the first draft of the human genome. However, we have also made some mistakes over the years. In 1916, we published Pavlov's obituary, which would have been okay, but he hadn't died yet. So we had to withdraw that quite quickly. We unfortunately rejected Krebs' cycle without review. And similarly, we unfortunately rejected Fermi's beta decay. So we absolutely can make mistakes. Our audience and reach is large. We have over 43.8 million monthly page views and over 20 million monthly sessions where individuals sit down for over 3 minutes to go through the journals. We have an international geographical reach. 35% are from the Americas, 26% are from Europe and the United Kingdom, and nearly 40% of our readers come from Asia, the rest of the world. The Nature journals have 4 editorial offices in London, in New York, Shanghai, and in Berlin. And it takes a small village to publish Nature and all the Nature journals. We have over 520 staff that work on Nature and the Nature research journals, 350 manuscript editors, 120 production staff who publish the journal, and Nature has over 50 journalists. So what do all these editors do? The editors are the face of Nature. They attend meetings, they attend lab visits so that they remain in touch with their communities and at the cutting edge of science. And the day-to-day tasks for an editor will include any of these things and all of these things. So their primary task is to select research manuscripts. They commission reviews, articles, comments, and other content that goes in the front of the journals. As I said before, they attend scientific meetings and lab visits. On their own journals, they are the consultants for their specialist areas. They will write leaders on community issues, and they can contribute to news stories and research highlights. In the next part of my talk, I'm going to take you through the submission process for a paper. So when you submit a paper to Nature and the research journals, you are asked to provide a cover letter. Not all our authors appreciate why a cover letter is needed. And here is a letter from one of our authors who wrote to us and said, "It is not clear why a cover letter is required, except to fulfill the silly British preoccupation with letterhead and other emblems of status. Please accept my comments." And they didn't actually write anything on their cover letter. A cover letter is useful because it's an opportunity for you to suggest some reviewers who you think would be appropriate for the manuscript. We may not use all your suggestions or any of your suggestions, but we do consider what you say. You can also suggest people that you think should be excluded from peer reviewing your paper. And you can only list 2 to 3 people at a time. These might be people that are working on exactly the same research or have a related paper. And we will honor your wishes if you stick to 2 or 3 individuals. It's also an opportunity to alert us to potential competition. So if you are aware of another group doing similar work, please tell us on your cover letter and we will try and fast track your paper. And you would also tell us about any other manuscripts that you have submitted to other journals or that maybe impress on the cover letter as well. To take you through the review process, so as I alluded to earlier, peer review was first introduced at Science and the New England Journal of Medicine in the early 40s, but it didn't come to Nature until after 1966, when John Maddox became the editor. And even then, peer review remained informal and ad hoc, not necessarily documented. And it didn't actually become routine until the early 70s. When you submit your paper, you use this online tracking system. This allows us to transfer the papers to which all the editorial offices and editors can circulate the files to each other online. We use the same database that you use for submission. This is a summary of the process when you submit a paper. So when you submit a new manuscript, we have the same aids and tools to make that first assessment as you would. The editor makes their own assessment. They can use PubMed or Scopus, look at the literature itself. They will discuss the files with other editors. And if we need to, we will seek informal external advice on whether the paper should be peer reviewed. Once we've made that decision, we'll either send the paper for review or we will reject it. If the paper is going to go for review, we will select 3 or more reviewers who have the expertise that we need to give formal comments. Once the manuscript has gone for peer review, when the reports come in, the editor will collate the reports. They will summarize what the reviewers are saying. They will summarize how they want to proceed, and they will circulate the file to other editors to also comment. And then a decision is made on whether that file should be rejected because it's preliminary or not suitable, or whether we're going to invite a revision. Over 90%, probably over 95% of our files, we ask for a revision. We very rarely publish a paper after that first round. So if we asked you to revise, we genuinely are interested in the research, but we feel it needs some revisions. If we invite a revision, we'll wait for that to come back, and then we'll send it to peer review again if we think we need to. Eventually, the paper will either be accepted or it could be rejected again at this point. If it's accepted, we will contact the press office, who will release information about the paper to the media, newspapers, the news teams, etc. And we will also decide at this point whether or not the paper needs a news and views, in which case we will contact an external researcher to write that for us. So this is specifically about Nature itself. Nature editorial receives about 250 papers a week. 75 to 80% of the papers are not reviewed. They are rejected by the editor. 20% of the papers will go out for review. Half of these will be rejected by the external reviewers, and we will publish the other half. So Nature publishes about 18 biology papers a week, and at least 2 editors will read every paper that is published. And the average times it takes us to reach that decision, it takes us about a week to reach that first decision on whether or not we are going to review the paper. And then it will take about 45 days, 40 to 45 days following peer review, because we have to wait for the external reviewers' reports. The actual time to publication depends on the number of rounds of peer review that the paper has to go through and how quickly the manuscript is returned in between. So how do the editors decide what will be peer reviewed and what won't? Our editors are the author's champion. If the editor sends the paper out for review, they are genuinely interested in publishing that paper, and they will do their best to ensure that happens. So, as I said earlier, the Nature journals have a 2-step process for reviewing. In the first step, the editor reads the paper and makes that decision on whether or not the paper can progress. If it is going to progress, we then have external reviewers send comments. The editor will align the reviewers, the most suitable people, to make those comments. If you don't ask us, the reviewers will not be revealed to the authors. But if a reviewer says, I would like my name to be made known to the authors, then we will pass on the name of a reviewer. Normally, the authors' identity is shared with the reviewers, but on all our journals, we have rolled out double-blind peer review, which you have to opt in at. And if you don't want your identity to be shared with the reviewer, as long as you have sufficiently anonymized your manuscript, we won't reveal your identity to the reviewer. And the final decision after peer review is made by the editor. So when that editor is considering what they're going to peer review, what are they looking for? We're looking for a conceptual advance. Do the findings open up a new field, or do they shed light, novel light and insight on an existing field? Or is this paper settling a long-standing debate? The paper could also be a large community resource with a lot of value to a community. We also consider just technical advances, which will help the community with their research. And we also consider therapeutic advances, so a new drug that's going to help someone, or a new form of therapy for disease intervention. On all our papers, we're looking at the quality of the data set. We will consider the depth of the data set, i.e., is there enough mechanism? Are the findings technically solid? And we're also looking for the physiological relevance and generality of findings. So do they apply to more than one strain or across animal models? And how do we choose our reviewers? So we have a database of reviewers. The database sort of started in 2000, and all our authors are in the database, and we're constantly adding new reviewers from being in meetings, and we remove bad reviewers. What is a bad reviewer? A bad reviewer is someone who doesn't write an informative report. So when we send a paper for review, we don't want a one-line comment of this is bad, reject. We want to know why it's bad. We want our reviewers to support our authors to make that research stronger and more robust. You know, if a reviewer isn't prepared to do that, then we won't use them again. As I said earlier, if you ask us to exclude reviewers, we will, but we can't exclude whole institutions or fields. And we normally use 2 to 4 refs per paper. And when we're looking at the, you know, which refs that we need, we're looking at the technical experts that we will need. We want the referee to have a broad knowledge of the field. We want them to be efficient, and we want them to be fair-minded and sympathetic. So if there is a debate in a field, we won't use reviewers that we know either are pro or against whatever the paper is saying, because the paper will just be rejected or it will just be accepted, depending on where you sit. We go a long way to find neutral referees who are having a conflict by which side of the debate they sit on, but we want them to be fair and sympathetic to both sides of the debate. And what do we expect from our reviewers? We are absolutely expecting that they give us a detailed technical assessment of the paper. So we want comment on the quality of the data. Has the study been correctly controlled? Is the hypothesis supported beyond doubt by the experimental data? And less important, but our reviewers can give us an editorial assessment. And that's an indication of the level of conceptual advance that's been presented and the potential impact on a field. But the editor is allowed the final word on what level of advance or significance or impact we will publish. So as the paper is going through peer review and it, you know, comes back as a revision, we don't like to add new refs, but we will if the scope of the manuscript changes. So if you have, I'm a life scientist, so I'm going to give you a life science example. If you have a manuscript on stem cells for Parkinson's disease, and it's all about the cell biology behind the stem cells, but there is no clinical aspect. In the first round, we won't have a clinician on it. We'll have the cell biology person, and we'll have a stem cell person, and we'll have someone in neuro, but we won't have a clinician. If during review, however, you go and get lots of patient data to support what you're saying, then in the second round, we will get a clinical reviewer. Because we're always trying to use the same recs for different versions of the manuscript, we have to wait for all those reviewers to send their reports, particularly if we think that report is critical to the review process. Because when we send a manuscript back to reviewers after the revision, we don't ask them if they will review. We just send them the manuscript. And so sometimes they may be traveling or at a meeting or something, and therefore they can't send us their report in a very timely manner. As editors, we often hear from our authors that, you know, the reviewers were unfair or not appropriate, or, you know, they're from Mars. Our reviewers are our authors, and they are our readers. It's the same pool of people that we are using all the time. And in this slide, I want to go through how an editor makes a decision following peer review. So 3 reviewers rarely come to exactly the same conclusions on a paper. However, the editors don't make decisions based on votes. We look at the arguments being made. So let me give you an example of that. Let's go back to the paper, the stem cell paper, that's got a bit of cell biology in, a bit of stem cells. It's about potentially curing Parkinson's. And we would send it to 3 reviewers. We would send it to the stem cell person to comment on the stem cells. We would send it to the cell biology because there's a little bit of cell biology in the paper. And we would send it to the clinical Parkinson's reviewer, who doesn't know molecular biology, but will be commenting on the patient side of the data. If the reports come back and your Parkinson's clinical reviewer says, this is great, publish it, and the cell biology says, yes, the cell biology is fine, it's nothing novel, but it, you know, it is showing what it is showing. But the stem cell reviewer says they haven't, you know, found a population of stem cells. I don't know what they've done. This is technically flawed. We will reject that paper because the stem cells, identifying the stem cells for transplant is the most important part of this paper. An author will see that they've got 2 positive reports and 1 negative, and will get cross because they think that we've just sided with the negative reviewer. But we've sided with the stem cell biologist because most of the paper is about the stem cells, and that is the most important part of the paper. And so sometimes it doesn't seem correct that we've rejected the paper, but there is always a reason. We do now actually give the reviewer expertise to help people understand our decision making. If there is a very complex file, the editors will discuss with each other. And if we still can't find, i.e., let's say there's 2 reviewers from the same field that are saying completely the opposite thing, then we will go and find another reviewer to comment on those two, because we can't decide which one is right. As I said earlier, most papers do go through 2 rounds of review, and if we ask you to revise, we genuinely want to see a revision. And another thing that we're often targeted with is that we publish papers just because it's a big name. We absolutely do not. The editors are driven by the science. We don't care who's done the work. We want a solid paper and an exciting piece of research. And we do see a lot of papers published from the big labs because they submit a lot of papers. What people don't see are all the papers that are rejected from the big labs. A big lab can submit, 10 papers in 2 to 3 years, and they will see one of them published in 2 to 3 years. What everybody doesn't see are the 9 rejected papers from the big labs. Appeals are important. We are humans, we make mistakes, and we take appeals very seriously. However, while we do take them seriously and we consider each and every one, they can't always take the highest priority. So sometimes we are a little bit slower to respond. So this slide is showing how not to appeal. So some people write to us and they will say, I've rediscussed the paper with several esteemed colleagues who were highly impressed by its contents and strongly advocate that I contact you again regarding the suitability of the manuscript for review. There's no more data there. There's nothing factual about the research. That's not going to, this statement will not help you have your appeal considered. Some people tell us that we are ruining postdocs' health. Again, that may be true, but it's not going to help you progress your appeal. Some people say they've changed the title in the abstract to better reflect the contents of the manuscript. Again, that isn't the reason we rejected the paper. We rejected the paper because the data aren't tight enough. Some people say, they say, this is referee is X and they don't like me. And I know that that's why they're rejecting the paper. Often the guesses are wrong. If we think the referee has been fair, that's not going to help with your appeal. But what will help with your appeal is a point-by-point rebuttal, commenting on each and every point that a reviewer has made with data, if you have it, and if you don't, why you think you don't need it. And if you genuinely feel that a reviewer has made errors, then alerting us to those errors, we will investigate that further as well. So I've taken you through, the first half of the talk was to take you through actually submitting a manuscript, getting it reviewed, the decision-making process. I'm now, for the rest of the talk, going to talk about some other things that we do at the Nature Journals. So I've mentioned as I've gone along that we have been experimenting with peer review because we think it's important that we give our authors choices in how their research is reviewed. So we have invested in surveys to ask people what they think should change about peer review. And at the top here, you can see some of the responses to our surveys for how peer review works. So it's great to know that 82% of our reviewers think that the peer review process ensures that the quality of work that we publish is very high. 63% of our reviewers think that we should try different methods of peer review. And we, for the last 5 years, we have engaged very heavily with this. So as I said earlier, in 2015, we launched double-blind peer review as an option on all the Nature journals. So that's Nature, the Nature Research journals, and Nature Communications. And an author has to ask to opt in if they want to have double-blind peer review. And if you do, we won't share the author's identity with the reviewers. For the psychologists in the audience, you may be familiar with registered reports. And this is when the experimental framework and the design around a paper is published first, and then the author goes away and does the research and publishes that at a later date. And we publish registered reports on Nature Human Behavior and Nature Communications. In our survey, 51% of our reviewers agreed that peer review could be more transparent, and we've done a lot of work to make peer review more transparent. We publish reviewer comments on Nature Communications, and we have been doing so since 2016. And this year, we have started publishing reviewer comments on the Nature journals, on Nature, and we've also published reviewer comments on 8 research journals. 44% of our reviewers wanted more recognition from us. And on all our journals last year, we have rolled out that reviewers are given the option to be named. If a reviewer is happy to be named, we will publish their name on the paper. You can find a reviewer's name on the end of a paper under the journal peer review information. And that's happening on all Nature journals. We have worked on making peer review more robust. Back in 2012, there was a lot of discussion about the level of reproducibility in our papers. And one of the biggest things that came to light was that there wasn't enough information on the methodology, the statistics in a paper itself. So we created a reporting summary, and the reporting summary is given to every author that is sent to review, and they have to fill in a lot of questions about the statistics of the data set, about methods and reagents that they've used and how they are available. And then this is published alongside the paper at the end. In 2017, McLeod and co-workers did a independent assessment of the value of the research summaries that we are publishing. And they were looking at whether or not statistical criteria for reporting randomization, blinding, exclusions, and sample size was being reported. And they found that on Nature papers, in vivo criteria for this was being reported on average sort of 60% of our papers, which is amazing. And for non-Nature papers, only about 10% of papers were reporting this criteria. So clearly the reporting summary was having an impact. We also asked our authors what they think about the reporting summary. 83% of surveyed authors felt that the checklist significantly improved the reporting of statistics with papers published in Nature. 78% of authors continue to use the checklist within their laboratories and in the research that they are doing generally. And roughly a quarter are using it to a larger extent. In this section, I just want to quickly go over the family of journals that we are, and make the point that we all do talk to each other if the author gives us permission. Ultimately, we want to be able to find a home for every manuscript that is submitted to us. So I alluded to earlier, but since 2015, we've been launching many research journals. And I just want to say why we've launched all these research journals. So in part, some of the research journals are driven by community demand. And these journals are those, so ecology and evolution, microbiology, astronomy, plants, are all driven by communities that said to us, we want a research journal. And so we've launched them. We're also launching journals in new communities. And these are an example of the newer areas that we're going into: engineering, materials, electronics, AI, computational science, etc. But we're also supporting the social sciences and the sustainability development goals, which we are very, very much behind, and have launched journals for energy, human behavior, sustainability, food, and aging. As I said, in 2010, we launched Nature Communications. That's our flagship open access journal. It's interdisciplinary, publishes research across the natural and the social sciences. Their criterion is high quality of content of interest to specialists in their fields. They are an in-house team of experienced editors, and papers are published rapidly. More recently, in 2017, we launched the communications journals. So these aren't nature journals, but they are from our wider portfolio. They are a mixture of academic editors as well as professional editors. They are also open access, and you can see the full extent of the number of journals we have there. And back in 2011, we published Scientific Reports. Again, this is not a nature journal, but it is a portfolio journal. This is our Sound Science journal. Again, this is an academic journal with academic boards and led by the community. It's fully open access and rapid publication. So I noted earlier that we want to be able to find a home for every manuscript. So when you submit a paper to the nature journals, you are asked a question, and that is, if your paper is rejected, are you happy for us to consult with another journal? Over 80% of our authors tick yes to that. So there is a lot of demand for our editors to consult with other journals to see if we can find a home if it's going to be rejected. If you tick yes, and you decide to transfer the manuscript to the journal that we are recommending, you can transfer the reviewer reports automatically. You're not starting the review process from the very beginning. You will just continue it from where you are. You don't need to do any further formatting of your manuscript. You don't need to submit any more files. the editors will simply take the manuscript from where it was and continue the process. And in my last section of the talk, I just want to talk about open science. So many of you will have seen all the nature journals will publish open access papers if you are happy to pay our APC. We also have transformative agreements with institutes or countries. And what this means is that an institute or a country will agree to pay all the costs of open access publishing for their authors. So recently, the Max Planck Digital Library, we've signed an agreement with them, and all Max Planck authors do not have to pay to publish open access in the nature journals. Their organization will pay and take care of the costs. We're also trialing different ways of trying to bring the cost of the APC down. And we have a pilot called the Guided Open Access Pilot that is open on Nature Physics, Nature Genetics, and Nature Methods. And here, your paper will automatically be assessed by 3 journals at the same time. So if you submit to Nature Physics, it will be assessed by Nature Communications and then the Communications Biology editors as well. So all 3 editors will assess the suitability in one round. If you agree to take this way of being reviewed, when you are eventually published, the APC would be half of what it is now to publish in Nature or a research journal. So all of that said, we do publish open access, but authors are still able to publish their work via the existing traditional route where the authors will publish free of charge and the primary research is made available to institutions and individuals who subscribe to the journals. As a group of journals, we encourage early sharing of research, and we have a partnership with Research Square, who are a preprint server, and all our authors can easily post a preprint at submission. We are advocates for open data. Now, open access publishing alone will not lead to papers with openly accessible code, data, and protocols. And we believe in open data, and we have invested in promoting and supporting open research on all our journals. So all Nature journals papers contain a data availability statement. And on that statement, we will write where all the data can be found, accession codes, source codes for computational papers and data, any other identifiers, web links for the data sets, and any source data for papers that have it. We will also make known any conditions for access of non-publicly available data sets. And as advocates of open data, we have launched a journal called Scientific Data. This is part of the Nature portfolio. And Scientific Data publishes descriptors of large data sets. And basically, this describes how the data set was created in a lot of detail, ensures the data is openly available in a repository, and it's a fully peer-reviewed paper, allows us to give credit to the people that actually created the paper, and we encourage authors of large data sets that submit to the Nature journals to also get published a descriptor on their paper. We have invested in the peer review and availability of good source code. We are working with CodeOcean, who are a software container tool. And they have a platform that hosts code, has the data and the environments necessary to run the code, and where the code can be reproduced in the paper. And so CodeOcean do all the checking of the code that's submitted. They host the code on a platform for peer review so that our peer reviewers are able to run the code, look at the functionality, verify the usability. And the code is published with a unique identifier that allows wider reuse and recognition. We also are open advocates for open protocols deposition. We have launched the Protocol Exchange, which is an open repository. You can browse this repository to find protocols from Nature papers, but also other papers. It's absolutely free to submit and free to use. All protocols receive a DOI. Some of our journals mandate protocols are submitted in certain areas, e.g. stem cells, microscopy, proteomics, RNA-seq data. But we do this because we know how important it is that there is detailed methodology to allow research to be reproduced. And finally, we support the research community and we promote researcher values. So we have signed DORA, we support ORCID, and all our corresponding editors, authors are asked to have ORCID IDs. We support preprint servers and author credit. And you've seen some of the stuff that we've done with peer review. And with that, I shall stop and say thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. Thank you for your nice presentation. Now we will jump to our next session, which is questions and answers. Some of the audience I saw during the seminar raised their hand. I just go to them and will give them mics for speech.
I've opened up the Q&As. So shall I just answer these questions?
Yes,
if
you have any,
yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. If you have any question, yes, please answer.
Okay. So I have a question here. Do high impact journals favor teamwork or solo researchers? We have no favorites. We publish papers from large consortia. We publish papers from groups of scientific groups coming together. So we don't have any favorites there. We publish both sides of types of research. Somebody is asking if we can access the recording later. I'm sure you're going to share that later.
Yes, we will share. Doctor, most of the questions comes either in private or in the chat room. It's not in the question and answer, unfortunately.
Okay,
most of the questions came to the chat room. I have received few of them. Just I want to read one of them. It's also interesting for me, really. They ask, if you accept a paper, do you filter the reference list for predatory journals or not? It is accepted for an author to cite a predatory journals in your paper?
Well, predatory journals shouldn't exist. If they are predatory journals, they should be closed down. So you shouldn't be citing those papers. But obviously, until somebody finds out it's a predatory journal, nobody knows. So the paper would obviously be cited. We don't scan your reference lists at that level to work out which journals you've cited.
Just addition to your answer, Doctor, we have scanned some of the papers published by well-known journals like Nature, Lancet, JAMA. Unfortunately, most of them cited journals that's listed in blacklist. So I think we don't specifically look and scan for predatory journals in your list. Am I right?
We don't scan. There is no software with which we can scan.
Yes. Okay. I just lost those persons. Another question: how can find an original topic that's could be accepted by Nature? How can find an idea that's interested by the Nature editors? I think this is a difficult question.
The elusive. I can't tell you how to find an interesting topic that we're interested in. You should look at what the journal is publishing, because that will tell you what the editors are interested in. And the more interesting papers have asked a question. So less interesting papers tend to do some research. They're kind of following where the research and the data takes them, but they haven't started their research with an interesting question of, I'm going to work out how to use this molecule to repress this pathway because that will help me stop cancer. Most people have their favorite molecule and they will look at what it binds and they will look at what it's doing. They didn't start their research with an interesting question. And then it becomes harder to publish in a higher impact journal because you go where the data takes you. But if you sit back and you go, okay, I want to ask this question because I think the journals are interested in this question, you are more likely to produce a high impact paper, but it's harder.
Yes, of course. We have attendee, Ghazi Juma. Ghazi Juma, you have the mic to speak, please. You raised your hand. You have a mic to speak. Ghazi Juma. Ghazi Juma, hello. Do you hear us? You have the mic to speak. Go ahead. You may not hear us. I'll give mic to Hannah Nariman. Hannah Nariman, you have mic to speak.
Hannah, do you want to speak? You have a question?
Hi, I am Hannah from Kurdistan region. I have a question, please. Is it correct that an author sent his manuscript to Nature journal, rejected, and later published it in a different journal and got Nobel Prize?
Yes, I think you answered already this question.
I said we can make mistakes at the very beginning. We rejected Krebs cycle, and that wasn't the right thing to do. So we are human beings, and sometimes there will be errors of judgment, and you know, we always say that a good paper will be published in a good journal. Just because Nature's not willing to publish it, that doesn't mean it won't get published in a good journal. And there's plenty of good journals. So, you know, ultimately we are happy when papers get published in all the other good journals as well.
Yes.
Ghazi Juma, do you have a question?
I think he's absent, but I gave Usama
Okay,
Zabari.
Osama. Oh no, he's
Yeah.
going to start. Ghazi, off you go.
Okay, I'll mute Usama. Ghazi Juma, please go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a question about that. I found some of the reviewers, they ask to cite his papers because he listed some papers and asked to cite it. Is that legal? Is that correct to ask something like that?
I think, you know, it's we do know reviewers do that on occasion. And on the Nature journals, because we have independent editors who aren't actually doing bench research, they are able to make that independent decision on, is that research really valid and should be cited? For a Nature paper, if the editor doesn't think that the paper should be cited, we won't make the author do it. At other journals, I don't know what people say, but clearly there is a conflict of interest here as well. So you do need your handling editor to adjudicate and make that decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Osama Zabari.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Adana. Thank you very much, Kaizen, for this webinar. I have a question. If you already explained it, the big name is not affected to the journal. I mean, affected to the editorial board for accepting a paper. But for example, what about the junior, I mean, the PhD student, if they want to publish their work in the Natures, this is the first question. I mean, the affiliation is affected. If I am in the, for example, in Middle East University, the ranking of the Middle East is not so high like in UK or United States and another country. This is the first question. I mean, affiliation. The second question is, if my work have a good novelty, even by accident or even by experience, so I have a chance to get at least a first decision, because you explain it, Dr. Dan, you explain it in the first decision. 70 to 80% rejected. So if my work have a novelty and my affiliation is no in the one of the biggest institutes, so how can I go through the first decision, and after that, how can my work will be published or not? So I think most of the scientists or researcher would like to publish their work in the Nature, because it's a dream for, in my opinion, is a dream for all researchers. So if you answer these two questions, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. Please, for all other attendees, please try to summarize your questions, because we have too many questions, too many hands raised, and we have a limited time. Please try to be short in your question. Go ahead, Doctor. Do you have any answer for for
Okay,
someone?
I will try and answer that. So first of all, if you are a student or a postdoc or professor, we don't know that. When you submit a paper, we don't know what your status is. Most of the first authors are PhD students or postdocs. It's the last author who owns the lab, your PI, that is the person that is more senior. So in all our papers, the PhD student cannot just submit a paper on their own. They have to be submitting, the PI of that group has to submit the paper. So that is how we work. You know, the paper is by a group. It's not by an individual on their own usually. But a PhD student certainly can't submit without their PI, their supervisor as well being involved, because they're still in training. How, you know, I said we don't care about the name. We don't care about the name. If the best research, if the most amazing paper comes from a small laboratory somewhere, I don't know, in some other Asian country or Middle Eastern country, but the paper has, I don't know, cured cancer, we don't care who did it. We don't care where they did it. We just care that they've cured cancer because we have to tell the world that they've done this. And I know it's difficult to publish in Nature. I mean, you made a very valid point. Everybody wants to publish in Nature, but we can't. You absolutely can't. And that's what the editors are doing. So the editors, day in, day out, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, they are looking at the manuscripts that are coming in. And they will reject papers that they think will not make it through peer review. They work with reviewers, they know what reviewers want, they know what is interesting in a field and what isn't. They are experts. Our editors have PhDs, have postdocs, they go to conferences, they go and do lab visits. They are very aware of what is high impact research within any community. And that is why they are able to reject 80% of the papers. So if the science is exciting, if the science is done well, it will go for review. It really doesn't matter who did the research at that level. You know, the sad thing is, I don't know if it's sad, but the way that our system is set up, the big labs, they attract the best researchers because they become famous, because they're big, they have the most money, they can put 10 people on the same project, they have the best equipment, they will collaborate with the best researchers around the world, and therefore they have a huge disadvantage on most other researchers. In the UK, every single researcher doesn't have that advantage. There are many smaller universities that don't have those huge grants, and they don't attract the best researchers, and therefore they can't possibly compete with the big labs that do. Big labs will submit to us many, many times a year, and we will reject most of their papers. But they will have one big one that makes it through. One small lab will submit once in their lifetime. And it's a lottery, you know, at that level. Either they've able to hit on some research which is exciting, and you know, the community is interested and everybody wants to know more at that level. But otherwise, they don't have the same advantages the richer, the bigger labs have. And that's society.
Thank you very much. That's nice explaining.
I have some questions here in the chat I can answer if there's nobody else there. Would you like me to do that? So somebody has said, how many plagiarism rates in Nature Journal are accepted? We have very low plagiarism in the Nature Journals because we do screen for plagiarism. We have a software called Authenticate. Every paper is run through Authenticate. If there is plagiarism, it won't be pursued. There are many, hold on, there are many by some research. So somebody is asking me of people illegally using other people's data and do we have an active method for screening this? So if the paper is published, normally our editors, when they read through the research, they will look back at related papers, and if something is a duplicate, they will see it at that point. But obviously we can't look at all papers in that way. And so once it's published, if someone then writes to us and says this data has been duplicated from this paper, we will investigate that. And if it is a duplication, we will either retract the paper, or if it was an honest mistake in some way, we will look to rectify it. But anything that is illegal, we can check that. There are lots of people asking for the mic here. Shall I say their names? Mohammed Haytham? Question, Mohammed?
Dear doctor, do you listen me? Hello everyone.
Hi, Kayan.
Dear doctor, I have one question and thank you for your nice presentation. And thank you for Kaysan organization for this opportunity. I have one question regarding the developing countries. Dear doctor, do you think that the developing countries must have their journals and publishing houses, or it is too soon for now? Thanks.
Sorry, Kayan, did you say that in other countries should we have journals that
Developing countries. Developing countries must have their journals and publishing house? Do you think?
Do I think that countries should have their own journals published? Is that the question?
Especially developing countries, not all countries, developing countries.
In the lobbying countries?
Developing countries.
Sorry, I can't understand that word.
Developing countries.
In the local
Like,
countries?
yes, like Iraq and Middle Eastern countries.
Science is international and research is international. And if a journal is not accessible internationally, then people can't see the research. Or if it's not written in a language that is understood widely, that journal's papers won't be seen or read widely. So the answer I will give is there is no wrong or right here. It's how widely do you want your research to be read? Because national journals, particularly journals that are written in native languages, will be read by fewer scientists than international journals.
Thank you, Doctor.
Hello,
Hello,
could you hear me, Doctor?
I can.
Okay. I am Mohammed Haitham from Egypt. Firstly, I want to thank you and KSign organization for this effort and valuable activity. Actually, I've got benefits. And dear Doctor, please, I have a question, if may I. As you know, one of the obstacles that faces researchers from the developing countries publishing his works or papers, their papers in the high impact journals. The question is that, is it correct that the high impact journals don't accept papers for the authors from the authors of the developing countries? If you have
Is it correct that we don't accept papers from
I mean, high impact journals.
We don't have any restrictions on any authors submitting to us. So you're muted.
Sorry, the same question. I think that there's a rumor here in the developing countries. We think that affiliation affects editorial decision regarding publication. Do you confirm that affiliation does not affect the peer review process and editorial decision? I received that question, I think, from about 10 attendees.
Yeah, but we have no restrictions at all on who submits, where they come from, anything like that. Anyone and everyone can submit. Everyone can be published.
Very good. Another audience, Hakan Murad. Hakan Murad, please go ahead. Hakan Murad, do you hear us?
Hello.
Hello, go ahead.
Thanks for your talk, and also thanks to KSign organization for arranging such events. I'm Hakan Murad from Turkey, and I wish to ask Dr. Jahan, I wish to ask about your suggestion and advice regarding young and fresh researchers, such as myself, to be able to publish my future work in high impact journals such as Nature. Thanks.
You want my advice on how to publish high impact work in nature journals? I mean, you know, my advice is to collaborate widely, because research now is such that it's very difficult for one small team to produce the amount of data that you need for a high impact journal. But if you collaborate and a lot of people come together, it becomes easier. I would, you know, the most important thing, I don't know your area of research at all, but the question that you ask when you produce your paper is important. I said that at the very beginning. read the journals that you think you want to publish in, see what they are publishing, because that will tell you what that journal is interested in reviewing. And good luck, because the door is open.
Very good.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, dear, as I mentioned, I have received several other questions. I'm sorry for those questions you cannot answer because we have a lot of questions. One of the questions there's a publisher named Springer Nature. Does this Springer Nature related to Nature Journal, your journal, or it's just a name?
Springer Nature is the big publisher. They own the Nature journals. So Springer has over 3,000 journals, which are nothing to do with the Nature journals, but we are part of Springer Nature, but we work independently. We have our own policies. We do exactly what we have always done, independently of what the Springer journals are doing, but we are one company.
Okay. Other attendee asking for raise your hand. Dia Hamdia, you have mic to speak, please. Dia Hamdia. Hamdia. She may not be.
Hello, and thank you for accepting my question.
Go ahead.
I'd like to know whether citing papers that are published in well-known journals important in publishing your manuscript in high impact journals or not. Thanks again, and thanks for Kaysan organization.
Is it important to publish your paper in a high impact journal? Only the researcher can answer that question.
No, I think, sorry, dear, I think the question is that citing papers published by high impact journal. For example, you write a manuscript. Is it necessary to cite those papers published in high impact journal, or it does not relate to them?
You should cite the papers that are most relevant to the research.
Yes.
Sorry. Hello.
Go ahead, Hero. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, I have two questions just to make it short. I want to know that is the opportunities for those that they are working in the social sciences are the same like those that they are working in a medical area or in a scientific area? Do they have the same opportunity? I mean, the criteria for evaluating their works are the same or they are different? This is my first question. The second question goes to the individual work and the team works. So, for example, my area is language. As you know, it's different from those medical or scientific parts. So somehow it's difficult for us to cooperate or to work as a team. So is there, I mean, according to the level, do you feel that teamwork is stronger to be like, they have stronger opportunity to be able to publish their works and the opposite for the individual works or not? I hope it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is there a difference in criteria for publishing social science and versus biomedical papers? I believe that's what you said. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
No, the criteria are whatever the journal states they want. So the quality of social science that we publish is very high. It's not easy. So you will still have to do a high level, a high quality of work to get published in a social science journal, just the way that you do in a biomedical journal. But for our journals, there is no difference there in quality. They're completely different areas of research, but are all high quality, high impact, and it's not easy.
Yes.
The second question I've forgotten completely now. What was the second
Individual
question?
work and teamwork, are they the
Ah, yeah.
same? Yeah.
Did you say you do language studies?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, whether you're in a team or on your own or whatever it is, that isn't a criteria for being published in Nature. It really doesn't make any difference. But in the natural sciences, the more groups that you have, the more teams that you have, the more data you will produce, and you will probably produce a higher impact paper. If you don't need, language, you don't need lots of people to write a language paper. But it is also an area that not many of our journals publish. So Nature may publish one language paper a year.
Exactly.
But we don't publish more than that. So
that was actually my concern, because I couldn't see so much papers in Nature publisher for languages.
No, we don't publish a lot of papers in languages.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear. Thank you.
Dr. And really, there are too many questions and there are too many persons raising hand. We cannot permit all questions because, we came to the end of our slots. Even the 5 minutes past the last the duration we agreed on. Do you have anything as a last statement, dear doctor?
I want to say thank you so very much for inviting me. I have really enjoyed listening to the questions from all the people that have asked something, and I can see the questions coming in the chat, and I know there's a lot out there. I want to, the object of me speaking is to open up the black box, to show people how nature works, because we want everybody to be able to apply, to submit a paper, to have that opportunity. And, if I have one message to everyone, don't be afraid. So do your research, submit your paper, give it a go. There are no biases against, there are no favorites. And if you don't try, you'll never know. So with that, I will wish everybody the very best of luck in their research. And thank you again for the opportunity.